My name's Brandon and this is Video Game History, a show where I take a look back on a certain franchise of video games and retrospectively review them. Hi Hi Puffy AmiYumi wasn't around for too long, but that didn't stop Cartoon Network from getting 2 video games out. Much to my surprise, Cartoon Network put out Kaznapped and Hi Hi Puffy AmiYumi, the Genie and the Amp essentially back to back. Unlike Kaznapped on the GBA, Genie and the Amp was made for the Nintendo DS. This marked the very first time a Cartoon Network property had made its way to Nintendo's juggernaut handheld platform. The game was developed by Century Sweep Studios and published by D3 Publisher. Century Sweep Studios were active between 2003 and 2009, developing mostly licensed games for the DS. They also happened to be the developer for Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends, Imagination Invaders. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem that Genie and the Amp lives up to the heights that Kaznapped reached. Kaznapped is currently the highest rated Cartoon Network game of all time with a 71 on Metacritic, while the DS follow-up could only manage a 51. However, we've seen in the past that even some of the poorly reviewed games can be a diamond in the rough. So could Genie and the Amp provide some of the enjoyment the first Hi Hi Puffy AmiYumi game did? For those of you who watched my last Cartoon Network video game history video, you'll know that I thought Kaznapped was a great introduction to puzzle platformers for kids. Unfortunately, Genie and the Amp doesn't even come close to the quality of that game. In fact, while I thought Kaznapped was arguably the best game I had played so far in this series, Genie and the Amp may very well be the worst of the games that aren't a glitchy or broken mess. Genie and the Amp is essentially a Streets of Rage clone with a Hi Hi Puffy AmiYumi skin. Now, full disclosure, I'm not a big fan of this genre, but I think I'm able to put my bias completely away when critiquing just how bad this game is. The very best of the games in this genre are still relatively clunky and cumbersome, which means Genie and the Amp is a nightmare to play in comparison. You're moving along in a side-scrolling manner, but can move closer and further away from the screen while you're going through a level. This causes major problems with the combat as the controls aren't tight enough and there aren't enough visual cues to help you line up attacks on enemies. So many times I took my time and lined up what looked to be a perfect hit, only to have Ami or Yumi go twirling past the enemy, often leaving myself vulnerable to multiple attacks. Even when you do line up your attacks correctly, the combat is so poor. Because every single game had to add some silly touchscreen gimmick early in the DS's lifespan, you can attack by strumming guitar strings on the bottom screen. Attacking this way is so cumbersome and it's incredibly inconvenient if you're trying to string together specific combos. The developers clearly knew the touchscreen controls were pure garbage because you can attack using A, B, X and Y right from the start without having to go into menus and change control schemes or anything like that. You can use special attacks by strumming 2 strings at once or by pressing 2 buttons at once. The game refers to these attacks as Desperation Attacks, however, it's not really an apt name. A better name would be something like, literally the only attacks worth using. Early in the game, these attacks are extremely overpowered, and there's no real point in using anything else. But then, as the game progresses, enemies start requiring more hits to go down, rendering normal attacks completely useless. Late game enemies are your classic bullet sponges. The game gives you 2 difficulty modes, easy and hard. I chose easy, so I can't imagine how freaking long it would take to beat the enemies on hard setting. Just look at how many hits from my special attack these enemies are taking, and yet they still refuse to go down. This brings me to arguably the biggest issue. This game is a brutal, tedious slog. There is absolutely no enjoyment in walking about 10 steps, encountering an enemy or 3, slamming the buttons for 30 seconds, and then repeating until the end of the level. This tedious gameplay is obvious from even the tutorial, and only gets progressively worse for every level you play. Adding on to the tedious gameplay is that there are 2 branching paths in every level. Pick the correct one, and you'll be taken to the boss battle in about a minute. Pick the wrong one, and you'll be taken to a dead end, something you'll only realise after you've battled enemies for sometimes up to 5 minutes. What is the point of this? The only answer I could come up with is it's there to prolong the game's life and frustrate players. It seems that the sole objective of Century Sweep Studios when designing levels was to lay everything out so your health is slowly sucked out until you can't do much other than accept death against a boss. As in the previous game, you can switch between Ami and Yumi and they both have their own health bar. Thank God they do, because you'll be losing health in so many cheap ways and good luck finding any health pickups. One of the worst ways you'll lose health is through the game's animations being so janky. You'll have stopped pressing the attack buttons, yet most of the time your character will continue attacking 2 to 5 seconds afterwards. Most inputs seem delayed, and this means you can't adjust on the fly when it comes to facing a bunch of enemies at once. This means most of the time you'll be taking a hit or two when you encounter an enemy because you can't accurately control your character. And then, as I mentioned, you will barely ever find health pickups. There are two ways to get extra health here. The first is by destroying objects in levels and praying to any and every god that it'll drop a piece of sushi. The odds of this happening are extremely low. There is one single item in the game that regenerates your health, and 99% of the time you'll either get a random item that does absolutely nothing and serves no purpose, or you'll receive jack squat. The second way to get health is at vending machines. One of the non-useless items in this game is money, which can be used at these vending machines to buy new costumes and new guitars alongside health. At most, there are 2 of these vending machines during a level, and the worst part is that buying a health pickup doesn't even revive a dead Ami or Yumi. But the vending machines also serve as checkpoints. When both of your characters die, you'll go back to these checkpoints and you'll have both characters at full health, which renders buying health absolutely pointless. Why would I buy health when I can just die and achieve a better result? It doesn't make any sense. I will give them props at least on the costumes and guitars. The costumes are fun little cosmetic changes that you'll be getting regularly, and the guitars offer you a wide range of unique attacks. Unfortunately, the game doesn't even tell you how much each item in the vending machine is worth, which means you just have to hope and pray you have the correct amount of money. The only other positive I have about this game is that the manga level is kinda cool. However, this isn't without its major flaws either, as it suffers from slowdown at times, most likely due to the amount of enemies they start sending at you because it's a late game level. I haven't even touched on the boss battles yet. I'll give them a slight thumbs up for trying to make each of them unique, but overall they missed the mark big time. Boss battles generally fall into one of 2 categories. They're either ridiculously easy or long, tedious and boring. An exception to this rule is the third boss battle, which is so cheap that I almost wanted to quit. You're fighting against multiple vampires who, if they get you in their grasps, will get off a ridiculous amount of hits and take huge chunks of your health. The only way to hurt these enemies is by hitting Kaz, which freezes all the enemies. But once again, you encounter the issue of not being able to line up attacks correctly, meaning hitting Kaz is extremely hard. Genie and the Amp also includes a couple of random minigames. One of them is a claw machine game, which is extremely easy and serves absolutely no relevant purpose that I could find. The second is a sushi making minigame that appears at the end of every level. This is where I found out that apparently there are stats you can upgrade. The better the sushi you make, the more your stats will increase, and which stats increase depend on the ingredients. However, no matter what I upgraded, nothing ever seemed to change. Finally, I think I should touch on the game's story. It's a little bare bones, but basically the gist of it is that Ami and Yumi unleash a genie and they wish to rediscover their musical inspiration. This results in the 2 stars going on a journey through time to various different locations around the world. This could have been such a cool idea, except every location and setting is so flat and bland. Every single level is essentially one straight line, save for the manga level, and they might as well just all be the same. This could have been the game's saving grace, but instead it's just as bad as the rest of the game.
Hey! Why, you little...
Get a real job!
Hi Hi Puffy AmiYumi, the Genie and the Amp is a terrible game. I've played a bunch of games on Cartoon Network video game history that were technically broken, but out of the games that are competently made and don't have any game-breaking bugs, this is the worst. It's just a soulless, bland, tedious mush of a game. The gameplay is so mind-numbingly boring, which is the antithesis of a property like Puffy AmiYumi, which is vibrant and full of life. The story for this game is something that could have led to a really interesting game overall, but it never comes close to being properly realised, which is a damn shame. Sensory Sweep Studios have put together an incredibly poor offering, which doesn't bode well for Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends' Imagination Invaders.